The 2018 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. Brought to you from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. The Democratic race for governor.
Welcome to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, originating from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting in Atlanta. Good evening. I'm Scott Slade, the host of Atlanta's Morning News and WSB Radio. Now, this is the debate among Democratic candidates for governor of Georgia. Let's meet the candidates. They are, in alphabetical order, Stacey Abrams, who was the first woman to lead either party in the Georgia General Assembly and the first African-American to lead the House of Representatives, and Stacey Evans. She was elected to the House of Representatives in 2010 and represents District 42. Thank you both for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
Now, let's meet our panelists. Bill Barrow is an Atlanta-based national politics reporter with the Associated Press. Josephine Bennett is the Assistant News Director for Georgia Public Broadcasting. And Deirdre Dukes is a reporter and anchor for Fox 5 Atlanta. Now, to start the debate, each candidate will be asked 2 questions by the panelists. Bill Barrow, you get the first question to Stacey Abrams.
Yes. Ms. Abrams, you have identified Medicaid expansion as perhaps your top policy priority among a range of ideas you say would build a fairer economy, more productive economy in Georgia. But facing the likelihood of a Republican-controlled General Assembly, how would Democratic Governor Stacey Evans make Medicaid expansion or something close to it a reality? And specifically, what executive actions would you take if you met legislative resistance?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to the Atlanta Press Club for having us. Thank you to the panel. As Governor Abrams, I would be excited to have a conversation with my colleagues, similar to the conversations I had for 7 years as House Democratic leader. It was my job to work across the aisle to find points of commonality with those who didn't share my political persuasion. Part of the job of being a leader is making tough decisions, but the other part is trying to find common ground. And just as I did on the Hope Scholarship, as I did on transit, as I did on kinship care, what I would do is talk to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle about the rural hospitals that are shutting down in their districts. Talk to those who have military families who are being denied access to health care because we haven't expanded Medicaid. And talk about the 50,000 jobs that would cover the state of Georgia, because those are jobs that would touch every person. And I do not believe that with the right Democratic leader, Republicans would continue to say no to a $30 billion investment in the state of Georgia.
Thank you for that. By the way, for rules on tonight's debate, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website, atlantapressclub.org. Each candidate gets 60 seconds to answer the questions, and if rebuttals are necessary, that'll be 30 seconds. That'll be up to the moderator. Deirdre Dukes, you may now ask a question to Stacey Evans.
Thank you. Ms. Evans, experience is a factor for voters, and neither you nor your Democratic opponent have ever held or run for statewide office, while the 2 frontrunners in the Republican primary have held statewide office for years. Now, given that, what experiences do you have that qualify you for governor?
Thank you for this opportunity. I've lived in Georgia my entire life. I grew up poor in Northwest Georgia, born to a single teenage mother, and we struggled to make ends meet. And because of good government policy through the Hope Scholarship, I was able to go to the University of Georgia, stay for law school, meet my husband, and now have a beautiful daughter and family. Hope gave me those opportunities. So my experience is living the life that Georgians live every day and knowing what it means to struggle and need your government to work for you. Not looking for government to do everything, but looking for government to do its job, to invest in our infrastructure like transportation and healthcare, and invest in educational opportunities, much like the Hope Scholarship, which allowed me to live a life of my dreams. And unfortunately, that opportunity is not the way that it used to be for more Georgians, and we need to restore that hope. My opponent in this race co-authored cuts that led to 97% of African-American high school students losing access to hope and led to 40,000 students having to leave our technical college. I want to bring back hope because I understand how vital those opportunities are for all Georgians.
Ms. Abrams, you were called by name. As in that particular answer, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
We are all entitled to an opinion, but we're not entitled to our own facts. And unfortunately, my opponent continues to misstate the facts and scare families. The Hope Scholarship is alive and well. The Hope Scholarship is available to families who need it. 100% of African-American students have access to the Hope Scholarship if they get a B average. It is a falsehood to say otherwise, and I'm deeply ashamed that we are in a campaign for Democrats where a single Democrat is trying to scare families and tell them that they don't have access to hope. That's just not true.
Ms. Evans, I'll give you a brief rejoin if you'd like one there.
Thank you. I am certainly not out to scare anyone. And the reality is, Miss Abrams tries to pretend like she has left intact a scholarship for all when that's not true. There was a gap that was created that cannot be filled. And for Miss Abrams to suggest that these families have access to hope when we know that there were 60,000 fewer scholarships awarded and that enrollment at both the university system and the technical college system went down, tells these families that she knows better than them what they were able to afford. They know that that gap was there, and they know that they can't fill it, and they know that they need a governor who will bring back hope.
Thank you very much. Josephine Bennett, your turn to ask Stacey Abrams her second question.
Stacey, Atlanta's growth continues to outpace the U.S. economy, yet many cities outside of Atlanta, second tier and smaller cities, continue to struggle. What is your economic development plan for those mid-size and small cities, and perhaps mention mass transit?
Absolutely. I grew up in a town a lot like South Georgia. In fact, I launched my campaign in Albany because it reminded me of the place I grew up in, Gulfport, Mississippi, a town that's far away from the capital, where families struggle to stay above the poverty line as mine did, where education and opportunity just seem far out of reach. But as the next governor of Georgia, I will continue the work I've done for the last 11 years in the legislature. That is working across the aisle to find solutions, but always fighting for the values that help our families. That means access to quality public education. I will never vote to auction off our public schools as my opponent has. But more than that, I will invest in small businesses, making certain that our hometown businesses get the same kind of support and investment that we give to these major companies coming in. And mass transit is not just an Atlanta issue. If you live in Talbot County, you have to go to Columbus to go to a grocery store or to get access to a hospital. And I will make certain that mass transit, paratransit, and connectivity happen across the state of Georgia.
Ms. Evans, an opportunity to rebut.
Thank you. I am a product of Georgia's public schools. I went through our public schools through kindergarten all the way until I got my law degree from the University of Georgia. I personally understand the paramount importance of public schools, and the Georgia Federation of Teachers has endorsed me in this campaign because they know that I am a staunch supporter of public schools and that I will always put public schools, teachers, and our kids first.
A brief rejoin from Ms. Abrams.
I appreciate the fact that my opponent has decided to stand on the side of public schools, but she went to the well in the legislature and voted for the Opportunity School District, which the Georgia Federation of Teachers and the Georgia Association of Educators, the largest teachers union in Georgia, which has endorsed me, said was a terrible thing to do to our schools. I understand and I appreciate the fact that she now stands on the side of public education, but I've never wavered, and I'm the only candidate who can say so.
Thank you. Bill Barrow, please ask Stacey Evans her next question.
Yes. Ms. Evans, here's your scenario. Democratic Governor Stacey Evans is successful in convincing Republican-run legislature to go along with your proposed HOPE expansion, lowering some of the stringent academic requirements and expanding to cover basically the cost of attendance. Shortly thereafter, you face a national economic downturn, not of Georgia's doing, but it tanks lottery revenues and tanks state general fund revenues to the point that there's a shortfall in funding the expanded benefits. What do you do?
Thank you. HOPE is so vitally important to make sure that opportunity is available for all of our families to get access to good paying jobs, and so that we can continue to try to attract the jobs that will keep our economy strong for generations to come. We can afford to invest in our people. That's a vital role of state government that I will never shy away from. For example, technical college was always worth the cost and was never out of our reach, even when cuts were made in 2011 by Republicans and my opponent in this race. It would cost $20 million right now to restore tuition-free technical college to the way that it was prior to the cuts in 2011. We have $60 million new dollars coming into the Lottery for Education Fund every year since 2011 that we haven't been spending. It is a small price to pay for us to keep families coming through our educational system, keep them coming through the pipeline to get to good paying jobs and pay into our tax revenue. I see this as an investment and not as an expense.
Ms. Abrams, you were mentioned in that comment. You have a 30-second rebuttal.
I do. And that's exactly the situation we faced in 2011, where revenues were low and expectations were high. And that's why I went to work to fight Republican attempts to impose a state-wide universal standardized test requirement. But it's not just about those going to college. It was also about the 4-year-olds who needed access to pre-K. And it was under my leadership that we saved pre-K, we saved remedial courses for technical college, and we guaranteed that 100% of students who had a B average could continue to receive the HOPE scholarship.
And a brief rejoin, Ms. Evans, do you have one?
Absolutely. First of all, it's absolutely not true that those who have a B remained able to get a full tuition Hope Scholarship. That's patently false. There was never an across-the-board SAT score requirement discussed, and we could have saved the Hope Scholarship to make sure that those who needed it the most, those that would not otherwise be able to college, that were like me growing up and simply could not have gone, could not have made a 1200 SAT, were still able to do it. And pre-K is important, but it was those pre-K teachers coming to the school and demanding that we restore a full day that led to those the pre-K day being saved.
That will do the time there. Thank you very much. And that concludes the first portion of the debate. The candidates will now ask each other 3 questions. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and 30 seconds for rebuttal. By random selection, Stacey Evans, you may ask the first question to Ms. Abrams.
Thank you. Ms. Abrams, as a Democrat, why did you not publicly endorse Keisha Lance Bottoms for mayor during the runoff?
As a Democrat, I believe in absolutely supporting candidates. But I also recognize that there's politics involved in politics. And the day that I was in discussions with Ms. Bottoms' campaign, she offered a tentative endorsement of you. That conversation and that tentative endorsement, while it hasn't come to full fruition, was sufficient for me to know that I could support her as a voter, but that I was not going to step forward and support her as an endorsement. She and I had a conversation about it, and she and I remain in contact. I do not believe that I've harmed her campaign in any way, but what I will say is that I have invested more money as the Democratic leader in Georgia in hiring and electing Democrats than anyone else. And I stand proudly by the record of flipping 6 Republican seats back to Democratic seats. And I stand with the mayor of Atlanta every single day as she does the things that I think we need to do, including ending cash bail, expanding access to education, and making certain that all of our children have the freedom and opportunity to thrive.
Ms. Evans, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Sure. The fact is that true progressives in Atlanta and all across the state of Georgia rally behind Ms. Bottoms to get her to a narrow victory. She was the only self-declared Democrat in the race. Whether my opponent endorsed Ms. Bottoms or not, I would have been there for my fellow Democrats. It's important that we stand together at all times and not just when it's convenient or politically expedient for us. And I find it really hard for my opponent to reconcile her claims that she's the true progressive in this race. When progressives and Democrats needed her, she stood silent.
Okay. Stacey Abrams, you may now ask a question to Ms. Evans.
In 2008, the state of Georgia expanded vouchers through the student scholarship organizations. And the Georgia Federation of Teachers, the Georgia School Board Association, and others filed a lawsuit because these are backdoor vouchers that call themselves scholarships but divert millions of dollars from the public education system. You have said publicly that you will not repeal these vouchers. Can you explain how you can stand on the side of public education and yet agree to divert almost $100 million per year from public education?
This is a distortion of my record, and my opponent has continuously misrepresented my record. And PolitiFact has even called her out on that fact and made clear that some of the things she is saying, including what she's saying about vouchers, is simply not true. I have never voted for vouchers, and I never will. I stand on the side of public education because I personally know how important public education is to getting students access to the opportunities that they need. There are no vouchers in Georgia. In fact, they're unconstitutional. This is a blatant misrepresentation and an attempt to distract from my opponent's efforts to allow local governments to divert money from school districts to give to politically well-connected developers for their own private business interests. And when she had a chance to be an unabashed champion and go and focus on making sure that hope was preserved for all students, she let her own personal business interests distract her when she was negotiating with the Republican administration.
Ms. Abrams, 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
I think that's a lot to answer in 30 seconds, but let me see what I can do. First and foremost, I did not say that she voted for vouchers. In a recent interview with the Atlanta Jewish Times, she said that she would not repeal the student scholarship organizations. You can look that up. The facts speak for themselves. Those are backdoor vouchers according to the Georgia Federation of Teachers. Number 2, I've never once traded a single vote for a business opportunity. That is a falsehood, and it's unfortunate that a Democrat would be using Republican tactics in this election to try to scare voters away from good common sense opportunities.
That's our time. Thank you. Stacey Evans, your next question for Ms. Abrams.
Access to voting is one of the most core democratic principles. A true progressive champion should do everything in their power to expand access to the ballot box, not cut it. So my question to you is, why did you not only vote with Republicans to cut early voting, but even go a step further and actually co-sign the bill that cut early voting?
Let's begin with the facts. I did not co-sponsor a bill to cut early voting. However, I was a voter for this bill because I've been to more than just Atlanta. And the cities in the state of Georgia, small cities, were being held to the exact same standard as Atlanta. And if you live in Appling, if you live in Zebulon, you know that you can't do the exact same thing as Atlanta and Fulton County. And therefore, we work together in a bipartisan manner with multiracial mayors and county commissioners to reduce the number of days of early voting from 45 to the national standard of 21. But I went a step further. Not only did we meet the national standard, I ensured that we also added a mandatory Saturday. And as a champion for voting rights since I was 19 years old and spoke at the March on Washington, I have worked hard to make certain that voting rights are kept for all. That is why I'm the only candidate up here who's ever registered more than 200,000 voters to make certain that everyone has access to the franchise. And I will continue to do the same as the next governor of Georgia.
And Ms. Evans, 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
First, you did sign the bill, and I'm surprised that you would deny it here, and we will be posting the bill with your signature online so that voters can see for themselves. And it is extremely disappointing that you continue to use Republican talking points to justify cutting off access to the ballot box. You consistently try to talk your way out of the bad decisions that you have made as the minority leader. Just like you don't save hope by cutting it, you don't save access and expand access to the ballot box by cutting early voting.
That's the time. Thank you. Stacey Abrams, you may ask your next question to Ms. Evans.
Certainly. Georgia has military bases that are the economic engine for many of our communities. And in 2005, Georgia went through a base realignment and closure process that led to the closure of several bases. We actually we increased the number of soldiers, but we lost bases. As the deputy city attorney, I was a part of that process for BRAC. Can you talk about what you would do as the next governor of Georgia to address the BRAC issue with the federal government that seeks to close our bases?
Absolutely. I would do what I did as a legislature when I took a list of all of the top priorities of the Department of the federal government to decide the criteria that they look at when they're closing bases. And they look at the military friendliness of a state. And one of the number one things on the list was making sure that there were educational opportunities available for veterans and military families. So I set out to sponsor a bill that would have made tuition at technical colleges free for Georgia Guardsmen because they no longer qualify for the GI Bill in full. And this would have filled a donut hole to make sure that these families had access to education. And in fact, it was partisanship getting in the way of the passage of that bill that led me to step forward and run for governor, because access to hope and opportunity is something that I want for all families across Georgia, especially our military families.
Ms. Abrams, 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
As the House Democratic leader, I led a bipartisan coalition led by Democrats to pass several bills that made Georgia move up the ranks and ensure that we will not face as many BRAC closures as we did in 2005. And as governor, I will create a military council that is funded and invested in making certain that every access is available. I look forward to doing this because as leader, I've learned to work across the aisle and across the state to make certain that all of our families, especially our military and veteran families, are taken care of. And I'm the only candidate who has put forward a comprehensive plan for how we deal with military and veterans in the state of Georgia.
Thank you. Stacey Evans, your final question for your opponent.
Thank you. The AJC reported that while you were minority leader, you made hundreds of thousands of dollars thanks to a business relationship with the Republican administration. This was at the same time you co-sponsored bills to cut the Hope Scholarship and early voting. Do you not think at a minimum that your fellow Democrats in the legislature had a right to know about this business dealings while you were negotiating on our behalf?
As House Democratic leader, I am proud of my reputation for transparency, for honesty, and for responsibility. And in that light, I'm actually going to correct something I said earlier, which is that, yes, I was not one of the original sponsors of the voting bill, but I did sign it at the end. That is true. And here's why. On every one of those issues, I did my best to do deep analysis, to understand what was happening, to convene committees. In fact, you co-chaired one of the committees I convened to make certain we had the best information possible. I did the same thing when it came to voting rights. But I have never once worked with a Republican administration to accomplish anything related to my business. I was a part of a program put together by President Barack Obama, and it was through the Obama administration trying to respond to the devastating cuts that happened during the Great Recession that I was able to save 2,000 jobs in the state of Georgia and help provide access to 350 businesses for access to capital. That's the kind of work we need, and that's the kind of leadership we need. And I'm proud of my record of honesty, of transparency, and of accountability.
And 30 seconds for rebuttal, Ms. Evans.
Georgia families need a champion at all times, not just when it's convenient. And Ms. Abrams was compromised negotiating on behalf of Democrats in the Hope Scholarship, and we didn't even know. She pretends like there have been gaps that she has provided ways to fill through a loan program, when in fact we've seen 60,000 fewer scholarships. We've seen 40,000 students leave technical college, and there's been an enrollment at our university system. Families know that there is no more option for them to fill these gaps, and for her to continue to claim that she did not cut this scholarship in a way to hurt families is just untrue.
Thank you very much. And Stacey Abrams, you get the last question of this round for your opponent.
Well, I will say this, in what has been a tense campaign, the benefit of what I've seen this year is that you have two women who are running for governor for the first time in Georgia's history. What would you say to young girls watching this about what's been the best part of being able to share this opportunity that we've both had?
It is very exciting to think about Georgia having the opportunity to elect its first female governor. And while I am sure that neither one of us endeavors simply to be the first female governor, we endeavor to be the best and a good governor for the state of Georgia. It is very exciting to think about the example that we're able to provide for little girls and boys all over the state, that women can rise and lead the state of Georgia. That's quite exciting. And I think it's also good for little boys and girls to see, and all of Georgians to see, that two women can be strong, can be dedicated to running a good campaign, and can stand firm on their principles and draw contrast in this race between issues and policies that voters need to understand. It's not just the men, it's the women.
Thank you. Ms. Abrams, 30 seconds.
I will say that it's been my honor to stand as a candidate, and I look forward to May 22nd and to November 6th, because I think that we are changing the face of what leadership looks like in Georgia. And I agree that it is not only for young girls, it's for young boys, but it's also for men and women who've had their voices silenced for too long. And I'm excited about the opportunity to be a standard bearer, not just for progress, but for opportunity in the state of Georgia.
Thank you both. That concludes our second round. For those just joining us, this is the debate between the Democratic candidates for governor of Georgia. We'll now go back to the panel to ask questions to the candidate of his or her choice until we run out of time. As a point of moderator privilege, I may also ask questions to the candidates. I'll determine when a rebuttal is appropriate. Deidre Dukes, you get the first question of this round to either or both candidates.
Thank you. And my question is for both candidates, and we'll begin with you, Ms. Evans, since Ms. Abrams had the last question. If you are elected, you more than likely will be working with a state House and a state Senate that will be controlled by Republicans. Now, how will you be able to create relationships with members of the opposing party to get your legislative agenda approved?
Thank you. I will work exactly as I worked as a legislator, to work across the aisle and come to good common sense solutions. I was able to pass 2 pieces of legislation that undid some of the disastrous cuts to Hope in 2011, and it was only possible to do this by working across the aisle and working with Republicans, and I will continue to do that. That's how we're going to be able to expand Medicaid and make sure that more Georgians have the assurance of insurance, and that's how we're going to make sure that we're able to expand business opportunities. Right now, the playing field is not level for those who want to do business with our state, for those that want to start and grow small businesses across the state of Georgia, and I will work with Republicans and Democrats, all of goodwill, to make sure that we are a welcoming state, that is one always open for business and closed for hate, and that we compete for the Amazons of the world and those 50,000 jobs, but that we also work to stay competitive for small businesses inside of Atlanta and particularly outside of Atlanta, where we need local communities to grow.
And 60 seconds to you, Ms. Abrams.
I will do the work that I've done for the last 7 years, which is work across the aisle when it makes sense, but always fight for our values. My parents raised me to believe in 3 values: faith, family, and service. And those values require a sense of responsibility. That's the responsibility to be honest, to be engaged, and to treat everyone with integrity. That's what I've done for 7 years as House Democratic leader, and it's why I was successful in getting money into transit for the first time in 40 years in the state of Georgia. It's why I was able to get $15 million a year added for families who are raising children who are not their own, much like my parents are raising my niece. And it's why I've been able to help Democrats, including Ms. Evans, pass legislation. In fact, I co-sponsored the bills that she takes credit for, and she deserves all the credit. But she also needs to learn to share the credit. And what I will say is this: whether it's an issue of hope or an issue of pre-K, I will always stand up for our families and our children so that everyone has the freedom and opportunity to thrive.
Ms. Evans, you mentioned that answer. You have a brief rebuttal.
Thank you. I appreciate that. it is important to collaborate and work together. And that's why I actually think women will be very good at running the governor's office, because we are a little bit more collaborative in nature. But it's very important just because we're in a situation now where we're running for the same office, that Ms. Abrams tries to take credit for the hard work that I put in. I got to the state legislature coming as someone who had benefited from the Hope Scholarship and had everything in my life because of that. I didn't need anybody to tell me to fight to save that Hope Scholarship program. I went to work day one to doing that, and I'm very proud of the work that I did. And it's not to say that we didn't work together on other things, because we did, but it's important that the facts are known.
Thank you. Josephine Bennett, your turn to ask a question.
I'd like you both to answer this question, and we will start with Stacey Abrams. You're both pretty similar when it comes to policy. You both want to expand Medicaid, allow women to make choices about their reproductive health, and do not support so-called religious freedom legislation. What do you disagree on besides the way Hope was handled in 2011?
I agree that we have a larger set of disagreements, and one is guns. My opponent has, I'm proud to say, has come on board with thinking that SB 350, a bill that required law enforcement to put guns back on the streets, was the bad idea. But I didn't have to be convinced, and I've only ever gotten D's and F's from the NRA because of my position on guns. She and I also disagree on education writ large. She continues to misstate her position on vouchers. And because even though they are a scholarship organization, we are diverting money from the state coffers, sending it to private schools. That is a distinction between us, and it's an important one, because that $100 million could be used to help our families, to raise teacher pay. Those are $100 million and 100 million reasons for us to repeal that bill and put those dollars back into our coffers and back into the hands of our educators.
And 60 seconds to Ms. Evans.
Thank you. There are real differences in this race, but our stance on public education is not one of them, as we've already discussed, and our stance on guns is not one of them. I am proud to have a gun sense candidate distinction from Moms Demand Action for my work in recognizing the importance of gun safety. I voted against guns everywhere. I voted against guns on campus, and she mentions one bill that I voted with, along with several progressive champions, including Senator Vincent Fort and Senator Nan Orrock. I have a D from the NRA. I also have a daughter whose reality is that she has to participate in intruder drills at her school, where they close the blinds, they shut off the lights, they huddle as close to the floor as they can and get as far as they can into the corner of the classroom and stay silent. That is not a society that I want my daughter or any of our kids to live in. And for my opponent to suggest that I would do anything to harm or put my daughter in a less safe situation, or her friends, or any child in the state of Georgia, is simply hurtful.
And these contrasts are pretty important. I'm going to allow rebuttals from both of you. So 30 seconds to you, Ms. Abrams.
Thank you. And I absolutely agree that our children need to be safe. My point is this. Being a leader is about decision making. It's about taking in good information and bad information and making the best choice possible. And when it comes to guns, I have never made the wrong choice. I have been endorsed by Moms Demand Action. I've been endorsed by Gabrielle Giffords. I've been endorsed by Giffords Courage because of my consistent record on these issues. I've been endorsed by the Georgia Association of Educators because of my consistent record on education. I've been endorsed by the Georgia Association of Family Physicians because of my consistent record on health care.
That's our time.
The consistency that I hold is why I should be the next governor of Georgia, because I make strong decisions and I stand by them.
Thank you very much. And a 30-second rebuttal to you, Ms. Evans.
The real differences in this race come from our stances on dedication to true progressive principles, which are expanding access to hope and opportunity. One of us fought consistently to save hope. One of us voted to gut it. One of us voted to ensure that the ballot box was available to more by voting against cuts to early voting. One of us co-sponsored a bill to cut early voting. And one of us, when we both had a chance to pick between standing on the side of big corporations and big banks or standing on the side of ordinary Georgians, I chose to stand with ordinary Georgians, where she chose to stand with big banks and corporations and make it even harder for ordinary Georgians to have damages from wrongdoing from big corporations.
Thank you very much, both of you. Bill Barrow, you may now ask a question.
Let's try to drill down on guns a little bit. The Supreme Court has affirmed the individual right to bear arms, but has also made clear in those same decisions that states still have the freedom to regulate in this arena. Please get specific on what kind of weapons, ammunition, and accessories you think the state of Georgia should outlaw, and what of those do you think you could get through the legislature?
You want both candidates to answer that?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Evans, 60 seconds. Ms. Evans, start with you.
Thank you. I think that we need common sense gun safety regulation in this state. I think that we should have universal background checks. I think that you should be 21 to buy a weapon. I think that we should ban bump stocks and silencers and high capacity magazines. And I want to start by making sure that we get the guns out of homes when there is a protective order in a domestic violence situation. As someone who watched her mother get beat up repeatedly as a young child, I shudder to think what would have happened if there had been guns in our home, and I want to make sure that no child has to worry about this in a domestic violence situation. And I think that's something that folks of goodwill on both sides of the aisle can agree with, so that we can get a win on this issue and start down the road of good common sense gun regulation.
And 60 seconds to you, Ms. Abrams.
Ms. Evans and I agree completely on this. We agree that we have to protect families, that we have to make certain that weapons aren't in the hands of violent predators. I think we have to go a step further. One of the reasons for expansion of Medicaid is that we need to provide access to mental health supports and substance abuse treatment throughout our state in a comprehensive way that we have never done. I also believe that it is critical that we have a 3-day waiting period. I recently met a mother, Ms. Barbara Spencer, whose daughter left Georgia Tech's campus and went to a pawn shop and purchased a weapon and killed herself before she got a message from her mother that she was on her way. That 3-day waiting period could have helped that young woman deal with her depression and still be with us today, being a graduate of one of our top universities. We have to do a comprehensive job, and I think that we can begin by repealing campus carry. As leader, I know that there are a number of Republicans uncomfortable with that the passage of that bill, and I believe that as governor, we could push to have that bill repealed in my first year in office.
Thank you both. Next question from Deirdre Dukes.
My question is for Ms. Evans. Ms. Evans, your opponent, Ms. Abrams, has received the endorsement of Emily's List, NARAL, and Planned Parenthood. Now, does this at all reflect on your record on women's issues, and what would you like the membership of those organizations to know about your record?
60 seconds.
Thank you. I have been a staunch advocate for the freedom of choice and access to reproductive freedom, not just as a legislator, but as a young attorney. Georgia has judicial bypass laws. We have a law that says that if you are a minor, you have to notify your parents before you can access abortion services. Well, for some young ladies, this is not a possibility because they don't know where their parents are. Their parents may be incarcerated, and they simply can't get that notification. So as a young lawyer, I helped young women who needed to access the state's judicial bypass process to get access to the reproductive freedom that they had the right to receive. And as a legislator, I made sure that I wasn't just voting against bills that would have harmed access to choice, but that my voice was always heard. And that included during my second session when I was actually pregnant with my daughter and giving birth on a day that the legislature debated the bill that limited women's access to reproductive health to 20 weeks. Even though I couldn't be there in person, I recorded a video message that played on the House floor because it is very important that our voices are heard, and I wanted mine to be heard on this issue.
Thank you very much. Josephine Bennett, next question.
This is a question for both of you, and Ms. Evans, if you could answer it first. Either way, the winner of this race will likely go into November, the election, as an underdog. Why do you stand a better chance of winning in November than your opponent?
60 seconds.
Thank you. There are two competing strategies on display here in this Democratic primary for governor. I am the candidate running the only race that can win in November because it's the only strategy that focuses on the entirety of Georgia. I believe that we have to do three things. First, we have to get Democrats and progressives out to vote like we never have before, because if you don't get your team on the field, you can't win the game. But once you get on the field, you have to not just run one play. You have to play defense and you have to play offense. That's why I want to go into the suburbs of Georgia and talk to moderate voters about why progressive policies like restoring tuition-free technical college and expanding Medicaid will not just help individual families, but will help our economy. And I know that when we do that, we will get votes. And I know this because I've done it before. In my last re-election to the state house from my suburban Cobb County House district, I outperformed Hillary Clinton by 12 points. 12 points worth of moderate Republican voters who voted for me, even though I had a Republican opponent who was supported by, it seemed, every organization under the sun. And we also have to compete in rural Georgia because those families want progressive policies to help their kids get to college as well.
Okay. Folks, I remind you, we do have time limits, 60 seconds for the big answers, 30 seconds for rebuttals when they are whispering to me in my ear. So I'm not trying to be rude, but I want to make sure everyone gets their time.
We're just very excited about sharing our messages.
Well, okay. That's fair enough. All right. And Ms. Abrams, 60 seconds to you.
We do have a different strategy. My strategy is grounded in 11 years in the legislature and 7 years as Democratic leader, where I led Democrats to flip 6 Republican seats by talking to everyone, urban, rural, suburban. I've also done the work of making certain that my campaign has already reached out to more than 1.2 million voters. I'm running a strategy that assumes there is no Democratic base, but there is an opportunity for a coalition that looks like Georgia. That is why I have 10 offices around the state and why I've held more than 250 events, urban, rural, suburban. I've worked with the Latino community, the Asian community, the Muslim community, African American community, the white community, because I understand that we have to knit together a coalition for Democrats to win. But I'm also the only candidate who has done this work, not just for myself, but on behalf of other members of the Georgia General Assembly. And under my leadership, we prevented a supermajority in the House for the entirety of my tenure as leader.
Bill Barrow, next question to you.
Yes, for both candidates, and we can go back to Ms. Evans to start. You've both said in previous debates that you would use the governor's office if you thought necessary to oppose some kind of order from the Trump administration with which you disagreed, if you thought they were not on sound legal footing. Can you tell us specifically, is there such an action that you have already seen come out of the administration that you, had you been governor at the time, would have taken legal action to try to resist?
Well, I think that the man in the White House has upset a lot in this country. He has worked to divide us when there is much more that unites us. And so I find a lot of what comes out of the White House disturbing and unnecessarily divisive. And I will be fighting against that as much as possible, as much as legally possible as governor. But here's the thing. What I want to do is look to the future, because I know that in 2020 we can make sure that Trump does not have an invitation to return to the White House, and that we can again start focusing on those issues that unite us rather than divide us, and we can build the kind of state and the kind of country where we all can live, work, and play and live out our God-given potential.
Ms. Abrams, 60 seconds.
I would absolutely disagree with the announcement made by Lieutenant Governor Cagle that he would send the National Guard down to the border. I think that is a wrong-headed use of our National Guard, and I think it's a demonization of the people who live within our state. As someone who's fought against anti-immigrant legislation, who protected immigrants within our communities, I will always stand up and say that that is wrong. I fought when the Muslim ban came down from the occupant of the White House. I created as leader Georgia Resist, a website to help organize families across the state of Georgia to respond, because I know that progressive values belong to everyone. We all share a belief that our law enforcement should protect and serve and should never be used to harm our families. And so, yes, I would absolutely disagree with Casey Cagle and with his determination that we should send the National Guard down to the border.
I have a question for you both, 60 seconds each to answer. Let's say the legislature sends you a religious liberty, piece of religious liberty legislation, even one that may mimic the one that was passed during the Clinton administration, word for word, federal law. What do you do as governor about that, and why? Ms. Abrams, we'll start with you.
Well, first, it would not make it to my desk because I would make it very clear that a veto would be coming. In fact, I worked with both Governor Deal and with David Ralston, the Speaker of the House, to try to prevent such a bill from coming out in 2015. Unfortunately, when it made it to the Senate, the bill that we put together was converted into an abomination that tried to demonize the LGBTQ community. But I will tell you very clearly that this is not just about the LGBTQ community. It's also about Muslims and people of different faiths. I am a deeply religious person. I come from 2 parents who were ministers, and I support the authority of my church, but my church should not intervene in the operations of the state. And so not only would I veto that legislation, but I would be the strongest and loudest opponent to that legislation ever getting a committee hearing under my watch.
And 60 seconds to you for that, Ms. Evans.
Any such bill would get an automatic veto. And in fact, I plan to walk around the halls of the Capitol with a pin over my ear so that everyone knows that a veto would be coming for any bill that masquerades around in the name of religious liberty, but is really just a license to discriminate. Because we have to keep Georgia a state that is open for business and closed for hate. And if any legislation like this were to pass in this state, we would have our economy going in exactly the wrong direction. All the work that we have done to welcome the film industry and other industries would be lost. So it is vitally important that the next governor makes it very clear that they will not support this legislation. And unfortunately, the top vote getters on the other side of this governor's race seem to be content on tanking our economy to pander for politics. But it's not just enough to veto this dangerous discriminatory legislation. We have to be proactive. And as governor, I would push for comprehensive civil rights protections, just like I did as a state legislature, to protect against discrimination in public accommodations and employment, to protect all citizens of Georgia.
Thank you very much. Deirdre Dukes, next question.
Thank you. And my question is for Ms. Abrams. Ms. Abrams, a number of articles have come out in recent weeks about the 2015 Republican redistricting that's now being challenged by NAACP as racially biased. And there seems to be confusion about how the redistricting effort unfolded, and a Republican legal brief even claims that your role in supporting the redistricting should undermine the NAACP challenge. Can you please tell us how this all played out in 2015?
Certainly. Let's begin by saying that it's shocking that the Republicans may be misleading when it comes to issues of gerrymandering. The reality is that gerrymandering happens every 10 years. That's part of the redistricting process. And I fought against that so vehemently that I actually told every member of the Democratic caucus that I would challenge them and would put opponents against them in their primaries if they voted for the 2011 redistricting bill. In 2015, a number of Democrats and Republicans in safe seats sought to have their districts redrawn a little bit, meaning they wanted to move a precinct here or a street there. Based on that information, I agreed to help my Democratic members move that legislation. When that legislation made it to the other side of the aisle, once we got it through the House, we discovered that the Republicans had slipped in 2 additional districts, 105 and 111. I immediately alerted my Senate Democrats. They fought against that bill, and when that didn't work, I called the NAACP. I called the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, and I worked with Eric Holder to file this lawsuit. It is deeply disingenuous to suggest that I had anything to do with redistricting to hurt people of color in the state of Georgia.
Thank you very much. Josephine Bennett, next question for you.
This is a question for both of you, and Ms. Abrams, if you could go first. You're both in favor of expanding Medicaid. How do you plan to pay for it?
One way that we can pay to expand Medicaid, which would cost about $156 million in year one, is by repealing the private school vouchers that are known as the student scholarship organizations. But we have other sources of revenue. We have tax loopholes that amount to more than $500 million that could be closed. We also have an online sales tax and a streamlined sales tax process that I've been a part of moving for the last 11 years that should generate about $1.5 billion in the state of Georgia when fully implemented. Those dollars are more than sufficient to not only expand Medicaid, but it's also enough to make certain that we're investing in education, that we're investing in small businesses, that we can do the work of leading the state forward. I'm deeply disappointed that the state of Georgia has diverted money that could have gone to put money back into families' pockets by slashing this year by implementing parts of the federal income tax bill. But I do know that as the next leader of the state of Georgia, I will invest our dollars where they belong, and that's in the families that we have in the state of Georgia.
And 60 seconds to you, Ms. Evans, on that.
Thank you. I lived much of my life without health insurance, so I know that the fear that not having insurance invokes in families. We simply cannot afford not to expand Medicaid and cover more Georgians with the assurance of insurance. We've had 8 hospitals close in this state since we made the immoral decision not to expand Medicaid. A lot of those hospitals being in rural communities where losing a hospital means not only losing access to health care, but also losing access to jobs. We cannot afford to continue down this path. If we can find $1 billion to attract Amazon, and I hope we get Amazon in those 50,000 jobs. I hope that Casey Cagle's reckless threats against Delta has not ruined that opportunity for us. But if we can find $1 billion to attract Amazon, we can find the money that we need to invest in expansion of Medicaid, which will also create 50,000 jobs and return $8 to $9 for every dollar that we invest. But it's not just enough to expand Medicaid. We have to root out fraud, waste, and abuse in our system that keep costs too high. And as an attorney, I fought against Medicare fraud to return over $300 million to the taxpayers, and I'll bring that same fight to the state of Georgia as governor.
Thank you very much. Bill Barrow, next question.
Building on that answer, start with Ms. Evans, and if Ms. Abrams wants to jump in. You mentioned the estimated $1 billion package for Amazon. That's part of a decades-long trend of state and local governments putting together incentive packages for businesses. The film industry in Georgia is an example there. Is there a point in that trend at which you would draw the line and say, no, we're not going to do that? When does that become a bad thing of, as many politicians like to say, picking winners and losers?
60 seconds to you, Ms. Evans.
What we've got to do is make sure that every Georgian has access to a good paying, dependable job. And attracting companies like Amazon is a step in that direction. We need to be competitive for these opportunities, but we also need to be competitive for small business opportunities and growth across this state. And I think that what we need to do is make sure that whenever we are offering tax incentives to companies, that we get the benefit of the bargain. Right now, we know that the film tax credits have been an amazing win for our state. But there are other tax credits and incentives that have gone out that have not necessarily brought the return on investment. And we right now have no commission in permanent place to look at this and make sure that Georgians are getting what they were told they would get. So as governor, I will implement a commission so that we stay on top of what we have offered out in terms of tax revenue incentives and credits to make sure that we're always getting the benefit of the bargain and that Georgians are always put first.
If I could jump in with a specific thought.
Sure.
Would you require clawback provisions for any deal you were a part of?
Absolutely.
Okay. Ms. Abrams, 60 seconds to you.
So as a member of the Ways and Means Committee and as Democratic leader, I actually introduced multiple pieces of legislation on tax accountability for exactly this reason. We know that we have hundreds of millions of dollars that are being wasted on tax incentives that are not producing results. If we want to invest in educating bold and ambitious children, if we want to build a thriving and diverse economy, we have to have the money invested where it should be. My position on Amazon is this: absolutely willing to invest as long as the investment is returned, as long as we can guarantee that good paying jobs actually go to our families, as long as we can make certain we do not decrease access to services for those communities where Amazon locates, and as long as we can ensure that if they fail to meet their end of the bargain, we can get our money back. But we also have to use the revenue that comes from Amazon to invest in small businesses. That's why during the Great Recession, I was so proud to work with President Obama to increase access to capital, because I know that access to capital for small businesses is the only way they can meet their obligations and build the kind of jobs we not only from Amazon, but from 5,000 small businesses across the state of Georgia.
Got a follow-up question there? You good? Okay, good deal. Do you favor a law that requires proving that tax incentives are a positive return to taxpayers? Ms. Abrams, 30 seconds to you.
I do. I agree with the tax accountability law. Tax accountability says that we evaluate every single year the use of those tax incentives. But it's not just the state, it's what local governments are also doing. Because often when those dollars are diverted and are not properly invested, what happens is that the local governments then have to turn to the state to make up the difference. And if they can't do that, what we find is that they actually end up cutting education costs, they end up cutting investment in public safety. And so yes, I absolutely believe that we should have a law that allows us to get our money back if people don't stand up to their end of the bargain.
How about you, Ms. Evans? What do you think about that? 30 seconds.
As a small business owner and attorney, when you make a contract, you've got to live up to your end of the bargain. And it's no different when it's two companies negotiating or two people negotiating, or whether it's a state government and a corporation. So absolutely, we will hold companies accountable for the promises that they make, and so that all of our tax dollars are always going to their highest and best use.
Thank you very much. Deirdre Dukes, next question.
My question is for both candidates. At this time, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing our state? And Ms. Abrams, I'll begin with you.
I think Medicaid expansion is the solution to the largest problems facing our state. We have an economic mobility challenge in Georgia. I grew up in a family where my mom had a college degree and had a degree in library science, but made less money than the janitor. My father was a shipyard worker because he had a learning disability that didn't allow him to get a job in an office. And so my family, despite having college educations, struggled to make ends meet. College is not the solution to everyone, but Medicaid expansion offers us three real things. One, it provides access to health care so that nobody working in Georgia risks going hungry trying to pay a doctor's bill. Number two, it allows us to invest in education because that will increase the bottom line in a lot of our counties by returning jobs to those communities, 56,000 jobs. But it also is about making certain that we build a statewide network of mental health and substance abuse so more of our families are going to jobs and going to work and not going to prison because they simply are too sick or have mental health concerns.
Ms. Evans, 60 seconds to you.
Thank you. The biggest factor and fear that most Georgians live with is not having access to opportunity. For some, that may be not having access to higher education. And the Cuts to Hope scholarships made it so that more are not having the same opportunity that I had to go and be the first in my family to go to college and get on to an amazing career. So we need to restore tuition-free technical college, and we need to return the original promise of hope. But it's also that opportunity to have health care access. We've got to expand Medicaid and cover more Georgians with insurance. Those are top priorities. We've got to make sure that every Georgian has access to a good-paying, dependable job. Georgia has the lowest minimum wage in the entire country, $5.15 an hour. Waiters and waitresses make the same $2.13 an hour that I made when I waited tables to feed myself in the late 90s. I know that we can do better than that. And children deserve, no matter where they live in the state, to have access to a high-quality public education. And right now, we know that there are a lot of issues that are keeping children from focusing in the classroom that have nothing to do with the classroom.
That's our time.
That's why I'll invest in community school models to help all of our kids.
Thank you very much. Josephine Bennett, next question to you. We have about 3 minutes left in this round.
Okay, quick question for both of you. What are your priorities for mass transit across the whole state?
I believe that we have to invest in mass transit, and as the leader in the Democratic House, as a Democratic leader, I was responsible for getting $75 million put into mass transit for the first time in Georgia's history. I will continue to do that work because it's not just about work and jobs. It's also about seniors being able to age in place. It's about those who are disabled having access to paratransit. It's about rural communities being connected to one another and connected to Atlanta. It's about making certain that our investments yield benefit. And as someone who went to the governor's mansion when I was 17 years old, we didn't make it there in a car. We went there on MARTA. MARTA got me to the governor's mansion, and it will be the first priority that I have when it comes to transportation when I become the next governor of Georgia.
60 seconds to you, Ms. Evans.
Thank you. Atlanta's economy and Georgia's economy are what they are because we took bold action and we had bold leaders who were willing to invest in transportation infrastructure, particularly the Atlanta airport. Investing in creating an international airport allows us to be a leader in the economy in the Southeast. And if we're going to continue our place of prominence, we've got to continue to be bold, and we've got to continue to make strong investments in infrastructure. I believe that starts with a coordinated regional mass transit system for Metro Atlanta. I think the county-by-county system has not served us well, and I think that the voters of Fulton and DeKalb have for too long paid more than their fair share. I want to rectify that situation as governor. But I want Georgia to know that transit is not just an Atlanta thing. And I spent almost equal parts of my life inside and outside of the perimeter. And I know that the world doesn't end at the edge of 285. And I want all Georgians to know that transit is not just an Atlanta thing, it's for all of Georgia. And that's why I want to invest in a commuter rail line system that will connect smaller cities to each other and to Atlanta so that all are able to access transit.
There's time. Thank you very much. And Bill Barrow, you get the final question.
We can even make this a yes/no if we want to.
We have a little time.
All right. The Supreme Court this week ruled that states should be free to legalize sports gambling so that it's not all domiciled in Las Vegas. So should Georgia get in the game?
And Ms. Evans, we'll start with you.
Yes, absolutely. As long as we dedicate the revenue from any type of gambling to fill in gaps of opportunity, which to me means investing in needs-based aid. As someone who never could have afforded to go to college without the scholarship opportunity of Hope, I want to make sure that we are closing the gap when it comes to those who need access to education and needs-based aid. That's the only way we're going to get more kids into college, and it's the only way that we're going to continue to make sure that we've got a workforce for all. Because right now, your chances of going to college have almost everything to do with the family that you're born into, and I don't want that to be the reality for all of Georgia's children anymore.
Ms. Abrams, 60 seconds to you.
I agree that we have to think about expanding access to gambling, but what I would say is that because sports betting is different. Sports betting actually involves multiple teams in multiple states and different jurisdictions. I actually think we need to wait for and push for uniformity across states, because otherwise we run the very real risk of creating a new problem to solve an old one. But when it comes to gaming as a general revenue source, I'm open to passing legislation to do so. However, as leader, I block that legislation every year because they refuse to put into the constitutional amendment that the funds would be dedicated to need-based aid. As someone who has championed hope for college students, hope for technical students, and for pre-K kids, I believe that we have to invest. That's why any student going to college at UGA right now with a B average will get $29,000 over the course of her time at UGA from the Hope Scholarship. Yes, it's a little bit less than someone who has the Zell Miller, but it's absolutely nearly a full scholarship, and I'm excited about the opportunity to provide need-based aid and full scholarships to every student so that we can expand hope.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. That's all the time we have for questions. Each candidate will now have 60 seconds for a closing statement. And Stacey Abrams, you get the first closing statement.
Well, I again want to say thank you to the panel. Thank you to Mr. Slade. My name is Stacey Abrams, and I'm running to be the governor of Georgia because I believe that every family should have the freedom and opportunity to thrive. But elections are about choices, and I think there's a very clear choice in this race. My family struggled to stay above the poverty line, but they never struggled to know what's right. My parents raised us with the values of family, of faith, of service and responsibility. And these are values I live by. I have never shirked my obligations, and I've always stood up and made strong decisions, even when they were tough, because that's what leaders do. I've worked across the aisle when I've needed to, and I've fought hard when I had to. But I've always fought for Georgia. From Albany to Jessup, from Dawsonville to Atlanta, I know that what we have to do in Georgia is put together a policy that helps every child have an educated, bold future, that we build a thriving and diverse economy, and that absolutely we have a responsible leader with proven capacity, and I'm that choice.
Thank you very much. And Stacey Evans, it's your turn for a closing statement.
Thank you. I've lived in Georgia my entire life, and I've had conversations with Georgians as a neighbor who was also struggling, as a legislator who wanted to open up the doors of higher education, and now as a candidate for governor who wants to bring hope and opportunity to all Georgia families. And through those conversations, I know what you at home know, which is that a lot of Georgians are doing well, but many more are suffering, and that Georgia is full of amazing and resilient people. Like a teacher that I met at a local technical college who, after the cuts to Hope, started keeping cash in her desk drawer so that when kids came in and couldn't fill the gap for their tuition payments, she saved as many as she could by coming out of her own pocket. She couldn't save them all, but as a state we can. I will be a governor that will never refuse to do everything that I can to open up the doors of opportunity, whether that means restoring tuition-free technical college, expanding Medicaid, raising the minimum wage, or making sure that our public education system lives up to the promise of all of our young people. I will fight tirelessly to bring hope and opportunity to all Georgians.
Thank you both, and thank you for your service to our state.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. And that concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that the primary elections will be held on Tuesday, May 22nd, and early voting ends on May 18th. Our thanks to the candidates, to our panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging tonight's debate. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club and all of the debates they're hosting this primary season, just visit atlantapressclub.org. Now, this debate will be archived there and on Georgia Public Broadcasting's website, gpb.org. I'm Scott Slade. Thanks for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. The Republican candidates will be here on Thursday night. Have a great evening.